Hi there, this is Bob Palmerton. Welcome to StudioSense. Today's painting is the view at Pilot Hill, and we're going to focus here in this pastel painting. It's going to be a 9 by 12 pastel on the clouds, really melodramatic cloud structure in this particular reference photo, and the plains in the landscape. There's a series of hills in the painting that you'll see and how we will convey the atmospheric perspective and how those hills kind of lose their local color in the distance. So I'll start off with a simple sketch. This is a simple line sketch of where the main contours of the landscape in the reference photo are seen. And I also chose a rather limited palette for this painting. The reference photo itself does not have a ton of color in it. However, and I use that as a basis for establishing. Let's get the values right as we always should in any work of art, and then select the palette or the colors that will certainly correspond with those values, but not go too far, too crazy on the color wheel. So we're sticking with a lot of greens and blues in this painting, and a little bit of yellow. Here I'm bringing in this is a mid-value gray for the blocking out the the dark and the middle values of the clouds. The composition here is really a focus on the sky. I mean, the clouds really gave it a lot of variety and action in this particular painting, and that's why I chose to do the painting was the cloud burst that we see here. So I'll block out the edges of the clouds with that mid gray pastel using the side of my pastel, and the other way of blocking out the perimeter of the cloud structure is to get the blue in here. So I'm trying to stick with a darker blue at the top, and I'll lighten that up as it gets closer to the horizon. Blend it really well. Uh, but also what you'll see here in the sky is you'll see some wispiness from the clouds, and I would encourage you. We don't want to draw the clouds. We want to bring some of the edges of the clouds against the blue, and they get kind of wispy with the vapor overlapping with the low opacity atop the blue sky, and that just makes it a lot more realistic rather than creating any cloud edges that might appear too sharp. Here I'm taking this is a deep blue gray um, pastel. I believe it's a unison. No, actually, it's American Artworks, and one feature that I enhanced or focused with this particular painting is notice how bright the sky is at the horizon. So when we block in that dark hill in the background, I'm going to bring in even a lighter and a lighter sky at that point, almost a white, but I don't use white, so I'm using a very, very light blue pastel. This will be at the strip of the sky at the horizon where that dark hill in the background, if you look at the reference photo, hits or meets the sky. So I'll kind of continue to work this cloud structure with the after applying that darkest value, bringing back the mid value, and then I'll bring gradually lighter values of grays and purple type purple gray colors. Actually, one of the American Artworks pastels is a it's called Atmosphere, and it's got some gray in it, and it got some purple, and even a little bit of blue in it. The highlights in the clouds are also an area of focus, where they look so powerful. The lightest portions of the clouds, that top part, and the lower part, and then the part that, as I mentioned before, hits up against the horizon. So I'll bring in a lighter value. This will be a lighter gray, and also Mount Vision pastels. So those are really good pastels. They cover really well. They're large and really hard, like a nice, they're a hard soft pastel, we'll call it that. This is the Mount Vision, and it's a very, very light blue. It almost looks like a white that I'm using here. And again, I'm going to keep working the cloud highlights back and forth. A very light portion of the clouds at the horizon, as I mentioned earlier, and I'll just kind of keep going back and forth. There is in the reference photo, it appears that there's a rainstorm developing. If you look at that reference photo, the on the right third of it, there's like a smear of light cloud going vertically across the body of the large cloud. And also I'll at the end I'll blend some of that into this too to add further drama. Again, working a lot of those lights. I also have a light pink white type of a color, also Mount Vision, that I will use. What I really liked about this is just really pressing hard with the pastel, which just saw there that light color right up against the dark blue, really takes your focus into that part of the painting. This is the painting is that's about sky, so when you look at a landscape, you say, well, what is it about this particular landscape that I really enjoy looking at, that really caught my attention. And in this particular case, in the view of Pilot Hill, it is in fact the clouds. So there's that very light spot up against the dark blue sky, that light highlighted cloud there. So at this point, getting pretty happy with the clouds. Again, you can see where I put some of that light cloud right about at the horizon. Blending comes in very handy when you're working with clouds. So use your fingers. That's usually the best when we're blending the soft edges of the various values in a cloud structure. The contrast between the edge of the clouds, that darkest part down at the bottom, and the lighter clouds there, I'll keep working that back and forth to enhance that further. Here's where the blending comes into play. I avoid using a tortillon at this point. My fingers work best. Tortillons tend to, they got to be pretty clean because when you're working with a sky, you don't want the green from a landscape grasses that you might have used a tortillon for to hit the sky. The whiteness of the clouds, that'll mess that up. So unless you have a really clean or new tortillon, I think fingers work great when you're blending sky. And we'll fix that part on the right. You can see where there's like a drip of sky there, or of clouds. We'll take care of that later on. There's certain technical aspects of every painting, and every so often you'll see something that just is not working, or it's just wrong or drawn incorrectly, and so that's one of the items that we'll fix as we go through. I take as practice. I take a lot of notes on my paintings while I'm working on them, and I'll stand back and I'll photograph them, photograph the progress of the painting, and put it up on my computer later and add more notes to as to what I want to change in the work of art next time I'm doing that painting. So I'm really happy with how this is turning out. There's some gray, blue in the clouds. There's a little bit of purple in there. Um, Definitely kick up your colors when you're doing clouds. Don't just stick with grays and whites, or blacks. So at this point, and certainly I'm working top down on this. This is a 9 by 12 UART 400 grade sandpaper. So working from the top to bottom. Now I'm applying black more so to highlight the fact that the darkest value is in that hill in the background, but also really to do a little bit more of the drawing of the plains in this landscape. And I wanted to use black because I really wanted to see how strong I could build that contrast between the bottom of the clouds, which was really a further distance of light white clouds, fluffy clouds, way in the distance, against that dark shaded or shadowed background. Be mindful when you think about when you're doing a landscape and you've got a lot of clouds or clumps of clouds, groupings of clouds, that you're going to have shadows in on the landscape. And that's really what's happened with that dark hill in the background that is picking up shadows from those large clouds blocking the sun. When we talk about atmospheric impact, I'm bringing in like a gray green in the background, so it's sort of a hazy look. We'll maybe touch that up even further and bring in a little bit of blue. There's a couple of hills there. You can see the darkest in the front, and then the middle, which is that gray green, and then more of a blue in the distance. And you can test that value as you work the painting to see, is it light enough in the back? Is it is it cool enough? Did it lose enough of its local color being way back there? So this is another Mount Vision light blue pastel. So I'll highlight that because that's your most distant point. This is going to be the haziest, the more faded part of the landscape. And again, there's that contrast I'm building with that very light blue Mount Vision pastel. And think about these hills have trees. I mean, there's not just color and value, but there's contours and there's going to be some variety in the values of the hills that will convey groups of trees. We're not going to draw trees certainly. We're just going to kind of develop the perspective that there's that variety out there in the hills. When I work on a landscape like this, it's a very simple landscape, especially with the fact that the sky is the focus of this painting. So with a simple landscape like this, we really just want to get the blocks of value down and then work some further detail into it. But it's really an opportunity to build a pattern. Here I'm blocking in again very dark. This is a dark brown pastel, um, almost a black color again, where the major clumps of trees are in the landscape. So I'll get the darkest parts down first, and then I will layer that on with increasingly higher and warmer values of green as we start building out the shapes of those shrubs. And I'm not looking at building very much detail in these also. So I'm adding some blues, deep blues in here. And then what I like to do in this case is take some isopropyl alcohol and a foam brush and start blending, uh, mixing up, spreading out those dark areas, and we'll be building atop those dark areas with the foliage and the shapes and the warmer and higher values of the trees. So we sort of have a pattern in here where the trees and the placement of the shrubs and the channels of these shrubs kind of all direct you toward that sky. But in a sense, this landscape did not need the items in the landscape to lead you into the sky. You just kind of go right toward that sky, and the rest of the landscape is kind of collateral art, I guess. It's just there, but it's supportive of the sky, but the sky is the true focus. The the uh, the alcohol will dry pretty quickly, and then we'll be able to apply local colors on top of that. The palette itself has sort of like a yellow, brownish yellow, gold, if you will, color with green in it. We would layer in some greens, some yellow greens, just to fill up the surface of the sanded paper. Now, a lesson about or a thought about yellow, because there is a fair amount of yellow in this landscape, and we know that yellow is the color that we'll say it just simply disappears in the distance. You just lose that local color of yellow first of any of the colors, and the last color that's disappears in the distance, and the one that survives is that blue. So be careful that your boldest, strongest yellows are closer up front in the foreground, and they're more muted in the back, and you can mute them with blues with the complementary, or just gray them out a bit, even with like a purple. You can try some of that on the yellow. Here I'm putting in some of again, the contours of the landscape are defined by the lightness and the darkness of the various edges of the hill. There's portions of the hill that are picking up more of the direct sunlight, so those parts will be the lightest. And you'll see how I'll be highlighting some of those uh, hill edges that are picking up some more of the direct light. So remember, your strongest yellows are in the foreground where the local color lives, and then they weaken in the distance. Another thing to keep in mind in doing a painting like this is always remember any landscape painting is where is the source of light? Where is it coming from? And um, I thought about this in this particular painting, and given that as I'm looking at the sky, where the lightest portions of the clouds are. Um, I'm thinking that the most of the light is actually coming from probably from the left side of the painting, if not the foreground left side of the painting. So that'll help dictate where you'll build your shadows with those shrubs. So I was pretty pleased with this limited palette. Really limited to several values of greens and yellow, in addition to the distant bluish green colors. In this particular landscape, the lightest value is the sky, the darkest value is that distant hill, and everything else falls in between. I was thinking about this painting, and I was thinking about trees, and if you're painting a tree, that recognize that the sun hitting that tree is going to cause shadows of branches on other branches in that tree. So, got a big branch and the sun's hitting it. That big branch is going to generate a shadow on the branch behind it. So, if you ever observed a tree when the light was um, not necessarily overhead, but at an angle from the sky, could be earlier in the morning, could be later in the day, that's when you'll see a variety of patterns of shadows and highlights on tree branches. So when you're drawing a tree, think about the lighting again and how the variety of the values shape up based on that, the way the light is hitting the particular tree. Notice the lines that I've been building here. So the lightest values they almost look like paths, but they're really the edges of smaller hills and contours in the landscape that are picking up the strongest light from the sky. So, so it adds a lot of variety in here. There's not much detail at all, just blocks of color and values and and lines, and it just didn't need very much detail. The sky is what kind of rules this particular painting. Any black areas, I'll definitely cover up with a deep purple, deep blues, or deep greens. I would typically not use black in a painting, in a landscape painting, but I do like to use it as a basis or an underpainting, if you will, of portions of the painting. So at this point, the painting is pretty much two-thirds done. You'll notice that what I did in this particular video, I did speed up the painting time. So I mean, easily you could slow it down or you could stop the video, but you could see the various stroke marks that I'm doing even at a higher speed. So why don't we save a little bit of time this time around? I think the whole video is about 33 minutes. Again, bits and pieces of highlights, watching out the edge of hills. So if we look at a hill, we look at the top of the hill with the brightest value, and to convey the roundness of the hill, we're going to have a slightly darker value as we work down the hill. So that's what you'll see that like on the lower left between those clumps of trees. There's a little bit of darker value of that yellow orange there, and then you see the lighter part at the top, which is picking up most of the sunlight. Really get the depths of the shrubs to be picked up by adding mid and higher value greens on top of the dark green. So I'll bring in some lighter greens to add to that. So there are patterns in this landscape. The curves of the landscape in this example, the highlighted hill edges, all contribute to it entertaining the viewer. Yeah, I'll often go back there. See what I'm doing now is again more highlights in the sky and building a little more variety of value in the dark hill back there, but just to continue to add that contrast. There was some orange in this painting and just a bit of a glow of orange in the landscape. So I'll bring an orange pastel pencil here to bring some of that in and also blend it up a bit. Getting a little more of that highlight at the top of the hills. When I photographed this painting when I was done, it appeared that the highlights at the edge of the hills were a bit too bright. And I didn't really recognize that until I photographed it. So I went back, and they almost looked like, even in this view, it almost looked like maybe they were houses. They were white objects in the landscape. And it looks very white, even though it's not a white pastel. So I did go back um, in the final version of this painting and just brought the value down just a little bit in some of the areas, but not in all the areas. And your foreground is going to have a little more detail, so I'll work a little bit on those larger bushes in the foreground. I like to use a deep blue and a deep purple in the greenery, as well as the dark green and the lighter values of green on top of that. The question often asked is when do you think the painting is done? And at this point, I could have stopped and made that done, considered it finished, but sometimes I just can't resist. So in this particular case, I brought a little more of a vibrant blue pastel, mid-value pastel, almost a darker pastel into the distance to convey that atmospheric effect and to help isolate and segregate the hills. Sparingly using that yellow pastel pencil here. It's almost a very light orange pastel, not very much yellow. I think there's more orange in it. Here goes that contrast again. I couldn't help resist playing around with the edges of the clouds and the shaded, shadowed areas of the hills in the background. The blue in this painting gives a nice balance. The blue in the sky. You got the blue and the orange yellow color. So you got some nice contrast colors in here too. I think the blue gives some nice balance to the painting, and you could feel and see the blue that's also in the landscape, certainly in the distance, but also in some of that deeper blue in the foreground shrubs. That's the color harmony that I like to put in these paintings, is bringing a color in and having that color show up, same color, same value, in a couple of different areas of the painting to help balance things out. That's always a nice effect. I think you should keep that in your repertoire of painting techniques. Here's where I fix that sky, so kind of blend, and there's that wispiness that you'll see of the clouds kind of overlaying very lightly. The other day I was looking at the sky and noticed that there was some. You ever see that very light gray, wispy part of a cloud hitting the blue? And it's almost exactly the same value. They're both colors, definitely distinctly different colors. There's a gray, purple, and the blue sky, but they're the same values, and they really look interesting. You've seen that up in the sky. So try to look for that someday when you have a lot of um, blue sky, but clouds that are rolling in. So I really like that contrast of the shaded hills with the bright clouds. So I often go back and forth and work on that part of the painting. And again, that's the main focus area of the painting. So why not go back and keep working that aspect? Here's where I'm bringing in a palette knife to do some of the blending in the foreground and try and put in some gaps in the trees to see the ground behind them. And if we were doing a tall tree against the sky, that would be called a sky hole. These are I guess ground holes to build some of that behind the shrubs, but also to use the palette knife to do some blending, and it also helps to push the color into the sanded paper better. So I think that works pretty well. I tend to use palette knives more often than a tortillon because the tortillon tends to pick up some of that color. So I find that cheap plastic palette knife to come in quite handy. Tortillons come in handy if you want to soften edges a bit. So I'll do a little bit of that here also in a moment. And here's the tortillon, and working some to try to help build some of that distinction in various parts of the hills. That darker part of the hill, and then there's even a lighter value behind it, and then there's more of a bluish hill behind that, and then there's the very light blue hill in the furthest distance. And the tortillon does come in handy if you're trying to fill in the gaps on the sanded paper. Sometimes that's more of a technical aspect. You look at a painting and you think you're done, but realize there's some gaps that just probably could just do with a blending in and filling in of the color. of those particular spots. It doesn't hurt to do that as a practice, going through at the end of the painting to kind of clean it up in that way. So there I lightened up that edge of the distant hill to, again, build a little more contrast with the foreground hills. And given that I have some orange in the landscape, I wanted to bring some orange into the clouds. So I'm using that light, very light orange pastel pencil to just bring in a touch of color there. The just need to be careful that we don't create a greenish hue up there by blending it with the blue, because the orange obviously has yellow in it, and you've got some blue in the sky, or even in the clouds have some blue gray, so you need to be a bit careful there. Notice a cloud now on the right. So there's got this is a vertical smudge on the clouds, and that's where I looked at that and I thought, I'm gonna enhance that further, because that's where it appears to be raining in the distance. I'm not really sure of that, but it kind of looked like that. So I wanted to give it a little bit of that angry look. so so I'll do a little bit of blending in there, and adding some pastel strokes and a downward motion to help build some of that motion in the sky. Here I'm continuing to add some of the highlighted areas in the grasses. The orange also helped. The orange that I added to the sky also helped build some of that harmony again, bringing orange up in the sky where it was not before, and of course it was. There it is in the landscape, that yellow orange color. So I don't want any straight bold lines here. I want to break them up a bit with slightly different values of light, the light yellow orange color. Just breaking them up, and also highlighting portions of the hill, contrasting with the shrubs in the foreground, just to convey the hilliness and the rolling landscape, and the contours of the uh, of the hills. So this ended up on, and I'm adding a little more of those holes, if you will, or gaps in the trees. And that was it. Very simple, straightforward pastel. Love the sky. That was the fun part of it. This is how you can reach me. Follow me on Instagram, and look forward to doing another video for you in the very near future. Thanks for listening.